All right, so today we're going to take a look at the Hangman card, which is, I think, a pretty unusual card for the tarot. It's one of the only ones where the person's upside down, other than the Tower card. And it does have that connection to the Tower card in a sense that it is about change. And I think if you look up information on the Hangman card, you find that it talks a lot about change in perspective. And I think that, yeah, that's true. There could be changes in perspective dealing with a lot of different things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're thinking the opposite of what you thought, because it could be, but it doesn't have to be that. It could just be thinking about things in a new way. And I think that's important because sometimes we get stuck on certain outlooks in life or certain mindsets. And this card is also about being stuck. So there's that connection with being stuck and about changing perspective. So there's a balance there. Sometimes we do need that time to pause and reflect in order to become unstuck and allow that new perspective to take root. And sometimes that takes time, depending on what's happened in our past. And it may take some people more time than others, but we do need that time to process those things. Now, you can also see some very different approaches to this card. And I think that on the RWS, we don't really have a foundational, I think, image, because this card's very much connected to water. And I could be missing something there. I might need to change my perspective on it. But I don't see it as being as watery as a lot of the other images that I've seen from different decks. And if we look, for example, at the Celestial Tarot, we see that it has Neptune on there, who is the god of the waters, of the god of oceans and seas, also known as Poseidon. And we also see the glyph for water up here, which is the Hebrew letter Mem, which means, of course, water. And then we have the symbol for water, which is an upside down triangle. And that's the elemental symbol for water. So why water? Why is water really associated with this card? And we normally think of water as emotions or feelings, but it can be applied to some other things as well. I know in science, we think of water as a universal solvent. So it's able to dissolve more things than other substances. And I think that fits well with the alchemical perspective of this card. So why do I say that? I say that because this card is about the dissolution process of alchemy as well. So we're dissolving something, and you might be asking, well, what is it that we're dissolving? And we're dissolving maybe old ways of thinking, ego, illusions, things that require us to step away from the physical world for a time to really analyze and take a different approach to something that we've just been doing the same thing to try to understand it again and again. And that can be refreshing. It can be a new sense of hope when we do this. I think there's some very important things to learn from this whole process. I love this card from the Edmund Dulac. It's another person jumping into this watery world. And the world of Neptune, which is what this card's connected to, is a world of dreams and imagination. It's this watery world of mystery and the unusual, distorted nature of being in water, being out of our element and in something new. It requires a certain, I guess, preparation, knowledge, gnosis. These things are gathered as we allow ourselves to build that connection. So this person's diving into this world of just different types of things. There's all kinds of things around them in this watery world, but they're gathering these pearls. You can see they have a pearl. And these things in the imaginary or fantasy state that we can gather when we go into trance or the dream world are very valuable for our physical world. There are certain scientists who have done this. So August Kekule, he had a dream called the benzene dream, in which in the real world, he couldn't figure out the structure for benzene. So the Lewis structure for benzene eluded him for the longest time until he had this dream of the Ouroboros. And the Ouroboros is the snake chasing its tail. And he brought that into the physical world. And because of that, scientists were able to make breakthroughs in the world of organic chemistry. And we have a greater understanding of how to utilize that in our daily lives. So it worked for his dream world, and it also works for the physical world to bridge that gap. And Nikola Tesla, same thing. If you read about how he was able to go into his dream or trance-like world to bring about the components for the different machines and tools that he was working on or concepts he was developing, that also is something that you see as well. So we see those connections. And it is diving into this Neptunian world in which we gather by some form of osmosis these ideas and concepts, which is something that we may not understand initially or not even really realize is happening initially. But when we take that step to do that, that osmosis, that transfer happens, and then that brings about the transmutation of the character that we play in the role that we play in the physical world. This card from Tarot of the Holy Spectrum, I think, is a beautiful way of illustrating this connection. It says the tethered one. And so we are tethered to our eternal selves, our divine selves. And as we gain knowledge in the physical world, this gnosis allows our divine self to be liberated in a sense and to sort of awaken from a slumber and to have more connection with us through the bridge of the Jungian archetypes that Carl Jung mentions. And if you read his Red Book, he talks about the fantasy world versus the world of logic, and how these archetypes, and how if we play out certain scenarios with them in this dreamlike or trance-like state, there is this level of communion that allows for a more tangible connection between those two states that really does enhance the role of the character and the experience of the physical world, because the physical world's role or the connection to the physical world and how we see it doesn't have to be a tragedy. It can be something beautiful. And that is the hope that we talk about. But it goes beyond space-time, and that connection must be understood by going through the world of the unusual. The world of the unusual can be frowned upon. If we look at the sci-fi tarot, we can see that it says abused, scorned, and forsaken. Was he a madman or a prophet? So it shows this man in this sort of void state. And a lot of times, from the perspective of the outside world, it can look weird and you'll look like you are not fitting in. But there is a healthy relationship with the imagination and with the world of fantasy that Carl Jung talks about, and how he talked about how he struggled to break away from logic, because logic is the thing that ultimately can lead to madness if you do not balance that with a healthy dose of fantasy, because logic can be stuck. It can be stagnant because you're dealing with the same pot, you're stirring the same pot. But you have to bring in that imagination and that creativity to bring a fresh set of creation into the mix. That's how new inventions are born. They're not born of the same material necessarily. They're born of some new way of looking at things, right? At some point, this connection builds, though. It builds to the point where there's a challenge to the ego, and you can get this sort of egoic death, which isn't necessarily a death of the ego. It's just removing the filters created by our long-term connection with the ego. And we can see on the Earth Magic Tarot that there are arrows in the Hangman card, or in the Hangman on the Hangman card. And that is breaking from that illusion of the ego, because water is also reflective. So it has this dual nature to it. On the one hand, it can immerse and dissolve. But on the other hand, if you're just looking at it and you don't go into the world of Neptune, then you're just seeing your reflection. And you can fall in love with that reflection, which is the story of Narcissus and how he could not see the bigger picture because he was so focused on the beauty of the character, the role. If we continue to just look at our reflection, then we can have this situation in which we're similar to what Pinocchio's in on the Surrealist Tarot. So on this card, he's not immersed in the world of Neptune. He's not really in the full situation in which the hangman is in. And he's liable to look at the reflection and not see the bigger picture. Pinocchio didn't realize that he was a real boy all along. But once that death takes place, then the physical world sort of loses its grip. And I love on the Tilo 777 deck how it has this person and they're going to be immersed in this water, but in that water there's a snake. And that snake is symbolic of change, of renewal, because it sheds its skin and becomes something new. We have to be fearless in a sense because we are supported when we go into that world. Those archetypes that we encounter, the characters that we interact with, and the roles that we play in the astral or in the trance or in the dream world, they're there to also support. And if we see them as a sense of as a system of support, then that can actually make going into that world a lot easier. I love on the Navigator's Tarot of the Mystic Sea how it says suspension, because it gives me that thought of, yeah, we are suspended and held in a way that is supportive. And he's diving in for this pearl, which is interesting because there was a pearl on the Edmund Dulac deck that I showed you earlier. It's almost as if these collective truths, we grasp them as we create art and create concepts, and we see those things and they resonate within in a way that feels right and strengthens that tether that I showed you in the Tarot of the Holy Spectrum. When we strengthen that, then that back and forth becomes more liberating and allows for more freedom. But we do have to be brave and vulnerable in order to enter this world. Fear in this world plays out in a different way. It plays out in a way that brings about nightmares and night terrors, because we won't want to fully embrace the state and continue with it. We'll back away through the block of whatever nightmare we're having. In the Tarot of Echoes, the person's diving off the tree in a show of bravery to enter this world. So how do you cultivate that? That's the case. Sometimes people just naturally are able to do this. And so they can bridge the world between this one and that one. And they don't have to worry about the fear. Others, it takes time. I love on the Tarot of the Sweet Twilight how it has two people on here. The person up here at the top is reading a book. They're gaining knowledge. That knowledge makes you more comfortable. When you understand things, you don't fear it. And that allows you to go into those states in a more balanced way. They're catching these butterflies of transformation with this net. So there's a transformation that takes place just from learning as well. So that's an important component if you have fear or if you have guilt, because those things will change the conditions of the world of Neptune. The person at the bottom is more liberated. They don't have a shirt on. Also in the Toph deck, the person's naked. But in the RWS deck, the person's clothed. There's a difference there. One is more vulnerable and one is not. And that vulnerability, that openness allows you to transform in a different way once you go into that dreamlike or astral state. The fear. I think I want to touch on the fear a little bit more, because if we look at the 78 Tarot Halloween here, we see this scarecrow that's in the position of the hangman. And of course, we talked about nightmares. We talked about how it can be this terrifying experience. But that's still not something that should stop you. There is a transformation that can still take place, and you should keep with it, even if it feels uncomfortable. Now, I say this with a lot of caution because I know that that can be difficult for a lot of people. And it's either best to just stay out of the realm of this or to take the chance, depending on where you're at in your life. I think sometimes some people just, they need more time, and that's fine. This isn't a place where you start judging where someone's at on their journey. It is just a matter of giving information and letting people know that these different options exist. But that fear, like I said, can be a roadblock. If we look at the Tarot of Vampires, we see that there's a person. It's interesting because this kind of reminds me of like maybe someone on ayahuasca or some sort of hallucinogenic. And that is one way to enter the trance world or to enter the the dreamlike world of illusion and fantasy, and to really immerse yourself and blast yourself out of your body into these experiences. But remember, you have to have this gnosis in order to feel comfortable, because if you're uncomfortable, then you could have nightmares. You can have a nightmare state. And I think that a lot of people that just jump right into taking something like ayahuasca, it's this purging that takes place. And it's a very Plutonian instead of Neptunian way to approach this. You can approach it in a way of Pluto as well. I've done that. I wore Moldavite for a long time. And Moldavite and these Plutonian methods can transfer you from one state, from A to B, but it does it in a way that doesn't care about how it bangs you up in the process. You'll be happy once it's over and you'll be transformed, but it will be a rough ride. But do I discourage it? No, because you're going to get to the place where you need to get to, as long as you don't allow it to be a roadblock. It'll be a tough, difficult road, but I recommend it. So I do think that the Neptunian world of illusion is a process that's more pleasant, and I think that it's more favored versus, hallucinogenics or things like that, which is something that I don't condone. But everyone has their right to choose what they like to do and what they want to do. That potential is there. How we get there is up to us. So on the Science Tarot, it's about potential energy. Potential energy is stored energy. And that potential energy is something that we can utilize, but it's never going to be there if we don't take that leap of faith. We're not going to be able to dive into that pool of it. On the Black Tarot, we have that same sort of concept. We have this huge light source in the back that provides that energy, but you have to be in the position of the hangman in order to pause and to absorb that energy. So another thing that I want to mention here is that as this happens and you're able to bridge that gap between the eternal, the timeless, and the physical world, you might think that you might become more into like the law of manifestation, the law of attraction, and more of a self-centered or service to self, I guess, state of mind, because you are able to do things in the physical world that you weren't able to do before. You can make this world a little bit more in tune with a place that's pleasant for the character. But the problem is, or well, not the problem, actually the beautiful thing about it is you see people differently. Your empathy grows. Your understanding of everyone's situation grows. And you also don't have as much of a grasp for the physical as you used to. If we look at the Lubbock Tarot, we can see that the coins are falling out the guy's pockets. And coins represent the physical world. So those coins fall away. We also see that with the Alchemical Tarot. Now, of course, that relates to the biblical story of Judas and how he betrayed Christ for coins and how he hung himself from the tree and the coins fell away from him. But it also represents the material world falling away. And so this leads me to the element that I want to talk about in this video. So if you haven't watched my channel before, I usually take an element from the periodic table and I associate it with the card that I'm talking about, and I kind of go in order. It's just a form of alchemy that I've been doing since I started the channel, and I find that it's fun and I gain a lot from those connections, and it's very interesting to see. Sort of transformational for me in a sense too. But magnesium is the lightest metal. So if we think about the hangman and its connection to the eternal self, it's that connection to a lighter part of ourselves, a more etheric part that is more weightless and more timeless. The majority of magnesium comes from seawater. And so it has that connection to the world of Neptune. It has that connection to something that is about fantasy, something that is about opening up our minds to something bigger than what is in the physical world. It was thought of to be a key component to the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone in alchemy was this transformational elixir that would allow us to live life in a way that was maximized and to the highest potential through that connection to our divine self. And that light that we would gain from our divine selves is something that we would use in the physical world. Now, one interesting thing to note about magnesium is that it's used to remove sulfur from iron or steel. And I find that's really interesting because sulfur is connected to the Emperor card. And if we look at the Emperor card, the Emperor actually is in a reversed pose of what's on the Thoth system. So if we reverse that, you'll see that it kind of looks like the Emperor, the way the feet are arranged. The leg being behind itself is really interesting, and it doesn't do that in the RWS card. But what does that mean? That means that there's this sovereignty over the physical world, this control over the physical world that we want to have. And so letting go of that control is important. So removing the sulfur is important for finding that true power in the iron or steel that we're talking about. Iron being connected to Mars and that Mars fiery energy, which also relates this card back to the Tree of Life in Gebra. Magnesium is an important source within chlorophyll, and chlorophyll without magnesium would not be able to absorb light. Us without that moment of reflection and connection to our internal selves through that tether that we talked about in the Tarot of the Holy Spectrum, without that, we would not be able to connect to that source of light, that potential energy that we talked about earlier. This is all liberating. This all frees us and I think provides support. Our bones are a part of us that support us through our journey. We were always meant to have this level of suspension, this level of support in the physical world. We just forgot. Nothing is about learning, growing, ascension. It's just about remembering. And that memory, when it comes back, connects to our divine spark and it liberates it. And that back and forth is what allows us to transform the world. And like I said before, that is one of the most hopeful things that I've seen in my life. It's relaxing. Magnesium sulfate is used in bath salts. And, sometimes after a workout, or just at any time, if you put bath salts in, it sort of relaxes your muscles. And so that feeling of relaxation is connected to magnesium as well. And that can relieve a lot of stress. You feel a lot better. There's this purging that takes place, this purging of ego, this purging of what we thought we were, the programming that we once had. Magnesium hydroxide, known as milk of magnesia, is used as a laxative, purges the things that no longer serve us. And so magnesium, in a sense, has these foundational concepts that remind me of what the Hangman card is all about. So, thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Will. This is Atypical Tarot. And I'll be back with another video shortly. I'm going to try to speed up the process of making more videos here lately. And so, again, hopefully this was helpful. And I'll see you guys really soon. Bye.